right, we're at the inaugural podcast here, Studio Steve, as you can see in the background. Welcome. This is great. I've been wanting to talk about basketball my whole life, and I've got an opportunity to do that now with you guys. Anyone that's tuning in, thank you so much. I appreciate that. This is going to go up on my YouTube channel, all a part of Samuel Communications, which is what I do. I do entertainment, food, music, and sports, of course. And we're going to talk about basketball because there's so much to talk about right now, especially with the playoffs. We're in the Eastern Conference and Western Conference finals. So much happening, upsets, buzzer beaters. Of course, the whole situation with Kawhi and the Clippers blowing it. I don't even want to say blowing it, right? Because that doesn't give Denver any respect in terms of what they did. Shout out Jamal Murray, Canada's own, 40 points in a game 7. That's how you come correct, Paul George. Anyways, I want to start off by getting into Toronto Raptors. This is the shirt from last year when we won the championship. Thank you so much, Toronto, for everything you did last year, for everything you did this year. I don't think the Raptors got enough credit for what they pulled off this year. They lose Kawhi, of course, Danny Green, so automatically you lose a core of your defensive backcourt. Not to take anything away from the existing players on the team, but you lose that core defensive backcourt. Obviously, everything Kawhi brings to the table, unquestioned. You can't deny the skill on both sides of the floor, what he brings to the game, what he brings to the floor, the team, in terms of composure, in terms of just carrying everyone on his back. And he did that time after time last year. He also did that this year with the Clippers, and he proved that all through the playoffs up until Game 7 in the Western Conference this year against Denver. Now, again, going back to the Raptors here, they lose some major keys, lose some major pieces, but in the grand scheme of everything, they still retained everything that they've built. I think one of the things that gets lost with the Raptors is everyone put so much onto the idea that Kawhi brought us the championship. No disrespect to Kawhi Leonard and everything that he provided to allow us to get to that chip. But let's just remember that the Raptors have been building this organization, this culture, this team, this style of play since a Dwayne Casey 7 or 8 years straight, where we increased our wins per season and got better and better and better and better through the regular season, and then some success in the playoffs. Not necessarily what we wanted, of course, first and second rounds, but we've been building this program. We build the 905, the farm team, and the players that we bring up, like Pascal Siakam, like Chris Boucher. We're bringing these guys through a system similar to what Miami does, actually. And we've built this culture, this team, this organization that just really needed that one piece, that missing link. And we brought in Kawhi. And of course, you could see that worked, right? That's all we needed. And he benefited from the fact that he didn't have to come in like a LA situation and try to be the everything for everyone, every game, all the time. Lou Williams said it in the press conference after they lost that Game 7 that they didn't have the chemistry. They didn't have the cohesion. They didn't have what Toronto had that allowed Kawhi to get that championship again. Now, say what you want, but that Raptors organization is top-notch. I would say has created what I think is like the new team of the NBA in terms of speed, mobility, three-pointers, defense, and everyone bought into the system. Shout out Nick Nurse, Coach of the Year, right? And he got his extension as well, well-deserved. And so they bought into the system, they believed, and they pulled it off last year. And then this year, they come in, they lose Kawhi, they lose Danny, and they had a better record than they did with Kawhi. They had 150 plus games to injury, meaning players that weren't playing in the games. They lost over 150 games due to injuries alone, and still ended up with the second best record in the entire NBA, second best record in the East, of course, right behind the Milwaukee Bucks, who ended up having the best record in the league, who are also right now on the golf course somewhere with Giannis trying to contemplate where he's going to go. I wouldn't mind if he came to Toronto. give us that Kawhi Leonard effect. You know what I'm saying? Like we have everything in place. We just need that one guy. And then we got to look at what else Toronto did this year. Toronto was able to expand on our growth from the bench perspective, from the young players perspective. Look at what Freddie did. Freddie came into his own, right? Fred VanVleet, shout out, general on the floor, just ballsy. He'll go put up every shot in the fourth quarter because he wants to win the game. He wants to be in that situation. He wants to make the game-winning shot. And he did that so many times last year, including game 6 against Golden State last year. Had Steph Curry on his toes a bunch and getting on his heels, walking back, dropping threes on him. And so Freddie's development you know, was something to really be heralded because, he's been playing behind Kyle. He came into the league undrafted and he's just worked his tail off to get to the position where he's at. So shout out Freddie. Norm, of course, we've been watching Norm kind of grow each year. And in the back of our minds every year thinking, man, he's got to get to that next step. He's got to get to that next step. Maybe this year's the year. Maybe this year's the year. And this year was the year. Norm came out. And, we've seen it in the past with Playoff Powell as sort of the nickname he's been dubbed in the playoffs because he comes in and just provides a spark, provides that energy, provides defense. He goes right to the rim. He plays that old school street ball kind of basketball, and he can put up the threes, right? So he's got everything working for him. And this year was no exception to that, right? This was his blossoming. This is his coming out party. And then speaking of that, right, we go down further down the bench to the young guys that we've been building up. And a guy that went from the bench to the starting lineup this year is OG Anunoby. We missed him all the playoffs last year, right? He was out with injuries. So imagine how much more we could have done with him in the lineup in terms of defensive presence with him and Kawhi on the floor. Would have been nasty, right, for any other team. And you saw what he did this year. He came into the league this year in the offseason. He really put in a lot of work. You got to imagine how much basketball the Raptors played last year and how beat up they were, which is why they lost so many games to injuries this year as well. But he came into the league this year with a different mentality. His ball handling skills were nice and tight. He was finishing around the hoop easily too, I might say. And of course, his defense has always been his bread and butter, right? I mean, unfortunately, he's had to guard LeBron James in every Eastern Conference playoff matchup that they've had with the Cavaliers for the last, 2 or 3 years that he's been in the league. Like, this guy's only like 22, right? Jason Tatum's of the world. Like, we got a lot of great players for the future of the game. So we look at Norm, we look at Freddie, we look at OG, and, I'm going to throw Pascal in there as well, because Pascal, again, is a guy that we brought up through the 905 system. Of course, was the MVP and won the championship in the 905 in the G League, and then came into the NBA last year with Kawhi kind of being at the helm and being the dictator of the offense for the Raptors. And then Pascal being able to slide in a little bit, you know what I mean? And find the open pockets and cutting in the lane, slashing and playing Pascal's game, what he does best. And I think this year that kind of got lost because more of the pressure was put on Pascal to be that guy. Now, pre-bubble, and I don't want to use the bubble as an excuse, but pre-bubble, the Raptors were playing amazing. Pascal was playing amazing. Serge was playing amazing. Marc Gasol was even playing well. Kind of fell off in the playoffs here this year. So the Raptors are playing amazing basketball, right? And everyone is growing. Everyone is getting better. Everyone was contributing to what we were expecting anyway. Like I say, if you've been watching this team for the last 7-8 years, we've only been getting better. We've only been growing. We've only been adding pieces and bringing up people through the culture, through the 905. And, we want to go back and look at what Chris Boucher did against the Clippers this year, against the Lakers this year. He's had some monster games, and that guy's nothing but energy off the bench. Goes straight to the basket, offensive rebounds, which we sorely lack. He's always going up to contest shots and block shots, running the floor. He's like 7 foot. He'll put up a three. Mad game, right? Like mad confidence in his game as well. Matt Thomas is nice off the bench. He's putting up threes. He's a solid shooter, right? This guy, he reminds me of JJ Redick, actually, when Redick came into the league and when Redick was at Duke as well, just running screens and hitting trays. So, Toronto's got a great future ahead of them. They had a great year this year in terms of how the playoffs, played out. Serge said it best, you win some, you lose some, right? There's going to be great teams out there. Boston just happened to kind of be in the same position as Toronto, like building up around these young players. And, I think the core group on the Celtics really, Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum really got their confidence. I think it was 2 years ago in the playoffs. when Boston had lost Kyrie, and Kyrie went out with an injury, and Terry Rozier came in, and all these young guys just flourished and blossomed and bloomed. And since then, they've never looked back, and they've now become, elite players in the league as far as Tatum and Jalen Brown are concerned. And those guys, they put it on us. They put it on us. Marcus Smart, you got to give credit where credit's due. Personally don't like a guy like Marcus Smart playing against the team that you're rooting for. And I'm sure other players feel like that about Kyle Lowry as well, because they're instigators. They do things on every end of the floor, draw charges, score, play defense, get in the ref's ear, get in players' heads. And so that's a guy you want to have on your team you hate to play against. But those three guys really lit us up. And I think Tice did a good job as well of really taking advantage of the post against Toronto. And, all praise is due to Nick Nurse and everything that Nick Nurse has done. And then you can't really question his decision making, his coaching style, what he brings to the table in terms of getting the guys prepared for every game. But I think one of the things that Nick Nurse really could have done this season, in the playoffs against Boston, that would have been a little more effective, is what I feel like was our bread and butter all year, which was using our bench, using all the guys, not just sticking to the 7-8 man rotation. We got real tight against Boston. We only kind of went 7 or 8. We were using Serge and Norm off the bench. A couple of times they pull in Matt Thomas, but there was no Hustle Jefferson. There was no Chris Boucher. There was no Davis. There was none. The guys that kind of really were the grit of our team throughout the course of the regular season never seemed to get any playing time against Boston. And you look at what Spoelstra does, what Eric Spoelstra does in Miami. He runs Kendrick Nunn and Tyler Hero off the bench. Rookies, I might add, 2 rookies that he just has this ultimate confidence in because they have the ultimate confidence in themselves, and they come out and perform every game. Tyler Hero today in game 2 versus Boston just had an outstanding game. He had 7 assists in the first half and 8 rebounds, I believe, in the first half as well. So, I mean, these guys are coming out to play. They're coming out to ball. And we have those players, and we had the opportunity, I think, to provide a lot of mismatches for Boston. Serge obviously was ailing. He was injured, but you get Serge on the blocks. He pretty much scores every time against Boston. Marc Gasol got a little too comfortable out in the 22, 23-foot range on the court. He's the biggest guy on the floor. You put that guy in a couple of mismatches and pick and rolls on the blocks. You're not going to be able to stop him on the blocks, right? You get Chris Boucher in the game. You get Hustle Jefferson in the game. Now you add a spark. You add some grit. You add some offense. You add some up and down, east-west kind of basketball. We didn't really see that from Toronto. We didn't really dig into our bag. We didn't really go into what brought us all this success throughout the season. And I think that, we had a lot of matchup opportunities that we could have caused a lot of problems with Boston. And they kind of took advantage of that, of us not doing that. And if you look at how many 3-pointers Boston hit and how wide open those 3-pointers were, they were moving that ball crisp. That ball was on a string. They were moving it from one side of the court to the next, and Toronto was just running. It's like if you've ever played squash against somebody that's really good. Like I have a friend that's really good, and he plays against me. I'm running around like maniac, and he's just standing in one spot. And that's kind of how I felt like Boston played against us moving the ball around, as Toronto was just racing to run out to the 3-point line and contest, but we were never in position to either stop that pass from initially getting there or more so to actually have a hand up and contest the shot. We're always chasing. And I think that that's something we faltered from too on the offensive end. And a lot of that comes from losing a guy like Kawhi, right? Because you kind of have these players like Freddie and Kyle who are going to give you their offense. They're going to give you everything they have every night anyway. But we started to look to those guys as the 1-2 option. And we stopped playing our game in terms of like what Toronto has been successful at doing all year long, which is essentially what Boston was doing to us, was moving the ball, using our bench, using our energy, using our youth. And we sort of got away from that. And I feel like there was and I hate to say it, but I feel like Nick Nurse got outcoached in that perspective. And I know you want to stay with your guys. The dudes are getting paid. You know what I mean? Dudes are getting recognized. They are the guys on your team. But sometimes you got to go with what has been working all year long, right? You want to keep the confidence with those guys, those young guys, those 20, 22, 23-year-old guys that have given you, countless minutes throughout the season in the fourth quarter as well to help you win games. And you want those guys to be on the floor because they got something to prove, right? They got nothing to lose. And so we kind of lost that. And that was a little upsetting to watch from a fan perspective because what that ultimately meant was we stopped moving the ball. We stopped moving around. We settled for a lot of jump shots. We settled for a lot of threes. In the first 3 games of that series against Boston, we went, what was it? 2, 3. We basically went 13, I think, for 40 on 3-point shots in the first 3 games. So, I mean, we're just jacking up threes. No one's making them, right? We're not hitting them. And we're putting up contested shots, one on one. Like there's a couple times where Lowry's shooting over Mike Tyson. You can't really shoot over a 7-footer successfully over and over again. And Tice is a mobile defender and he moves around. And, he ultimately would have had a much tougher time in that series had Serge been healthier and had Mark been on the blocks a little more, get him in foul trouble, which we did see in Game 7, and that really limited his contributions to the game. So I think from us getting a little bit away from what we were accustomed to doing all year that brought us success really hindered us in the overall. But like I say, there was a lot of positives to take away from this season, right? Second best record in the league, coach of the year, losing over 150 games to injuries amongst the players and still finishing the way we did. Uh, even in the bubble, I think the only 2 games we lost in the bubble were to Boston, coincidentally. They had our number all year long. And, there's teams like that in the past, in the DeRozan years. Chicago was one of them when Jimmy Butler was there that always gave us troubles. And they always, you knew in the back of your mind you didn't want to play because there was a good chance that they could beat you. So Boston kind of gave us that. And I think, Miami would have given us a run for our money as well had we passed Boston in Game 7 and got through to the conference finals. But, shout out, big up Toronto. We had an amazing year last year. We had an amazing year this year as well. A lot of it has got convoluted and forgotten because of COVID, because of the bubble, because of all this shit. And I think that, if we just sit back and give a moment for the season to breathe, for Toronto's season to breathe a little bit and look back at how many success stories we had, has been amazing, right? And there's been a lot of growth amongst our team. And I think it's just going to make for a better future, for a better season next year. Who knows what next season brings, right? Because next season can be really dangerous in terms of losing players, but can also be really great for gaining players. You look at a guy like Fred VanVleet, who's got his contract extension coming up, or not, or he moves, or he gets traded, and we've seen Masai make some big moves in the past. We've seen him move DeRozan, who was drafted, 19-year-old rookie, spent his whole year with Toronto, sort of was the cornerstone of that franchise, and I believe holds every single record statistically for Toronto, and made us grow into this, what we became pre-Kawhi. And so it was kind of sour watching him leave and Kawhi come in and win that championship and DeRozan not get his chip because he put in the work, he put in the time, he put in the effort. And again, DeRozan actually on that note is also a free agent. So see where he goes. Does he come back to Toronto? Who knows, right? I'd love to see Giannis in Toronto, right? Like if we keep our team and somehow we can bring him in, that would be amazing. I think in order to bring him in, we would probably lose some pieces, maybe even like a Fred. And then you look at Milwaukee anyways, right? Like they got no backcourt. So is there a swap there? Is Freddie going to exercise his ability to kind of, use the market at his advantage? He's in his prime, so to speak, right? And he's just only getting better. And you look at what he did in the playoffs last year, in the Eastern Conference Finals, and of course in the finals, and what he does in fourth quarters. That's a guy that holds a lot of stock. That's a guy that holds a lot of value, right? So you got to keep a guy like that around. So there's a lot of amazing things that came out of this season. I'm really looking forward to what's going to happen next year, and where Toronto's going to go. So thank you again for Toronto for an amazing season last year, for an amazing season this year. I think it's been overshadowed by everyone trying to say what we did and didn't do and people pointing fingers at Pascal. Pascal had an amazing breakout season a year ago. He had a great season this year. I think people are just missing the fact and trying to point fingers because they feel like Toronto, and I should say this is only Canadian media, that Toronto should have gone a little further because American media doesn't really know anything about Toronto. They don't know anything about our team, the way we play, our players. They probably don't even know our players' names. The only players they know are like Kyle Lowry and Kawhi Leonard, who doesn't even play there anymore. They don't really know. So I don't really listen to American media when they talk about Toronto basketball because they don't have any idea what they're talking about, especially Bill Simmons, who was just going off about Toronto, who's a huge Boston guy. I didn't even want to go there. I didn't want to go there. But anyways, we're going to switch it up here. Ready to get into a next topic here. Bubble, NBA playoffs, bubble talk, and more. There's so much that has gone on in this playoff atmosphere in the bubble that I think has been, Cinderella story. Like, you see what Denver has done, has come back. Shout out Jamal Murray. Boom, right back there. Kitchener, Ontario, Canada's own. See what Jamal Murray and Jokic have done with Denver. 2 back-to-back series, down 3-1, coming back to win in a game 7. And this last one against the Clippers was the stamp, right? That was the approval that, all right, these guys should get some respect. Because not only did they beat the team that most people thought were going to win the NBA championship, but they beat them in an embarrassing fashion. You know what I'm saying? They whooped them by over 20 points in game 7. Kawhi Leonard had, I think, 14 points. Jamal Murray had 40 points. Jokic had a massive game. They just had contributions from everyone. On the other side of the ball, Paul George, fell asleep. Kawhi Leonard, he gave everything he could every game for the Clippers. I don't necessarily think he had the support that he needed. And I think some of the guys maybe just looked at him and expected him to rise to the occasion the way he did with Toronto and just carry them over the hump and, get them to the promised land. But, you look at a guy like Lou Will. Lou Will's nice, you know what I mean? But you can't expect him to come in and play starters minutes and score 30 points a game, although he can do that on any given night. Montrezl Harrell, I think they also to a degree got a little bit out coached and weren't really using their team dynamically enough as they probably could have against the Denver Nuggets. But on the flip side of that coin, sometimes it's heart against talent. And the team that had more talent in this case lost because the other team just wanted it more. They had nothing to lose, right? Denver had nothing to lose, and the Clippers had everything to lose. And maybe some of the pressure got to them. Maybe some of the pressure got to Paul George shooting those 3-pointers off the side of the backboard. No disrespect to Paul George, the guy's got mad game. But, he's never really been able to prove himself in the playoffs as I think he's capable of doing. And he did early in his career in Indiana. And, sometimes when you get to a team that's, sort of inundated with stars, I want to say, maybe not as superstars, but like Lou Williams is a star. Paul George is a star. Kawhi Leonard's a star. Montrezl Harrell is a star in the making. Like, he kind of reminds me of an early Kenneth Faried, where he just has massive energy and he's going to the hoop and he's offensive rebounding. He's a dude that is just energy, energy, energy. So, I don't know if necessarily that was the best environment for him because there was a lot of expectation for Paul George. And he's coming off 2 shoulder surgeries. I don't even know how you recover off his shoulder surgeries to come back and play basketball, where that's like the most important part of your body in terms of getting the ball up to the hoop. So, they sort of, I don't want to say fell apart, but they did fall apart. The reason I don't want to say they fell apart completely is because, again, it takes away from what Denver did. Denver is extremely well coached, and that team was focused going into every game to come back from 3-1 and winning game 7s and back-to-back series. It's unbelievable, right? And the sort of the growth that team has had just inside the bubble itself has been amazing. And now it's going to be really interesting to see where they're going to go against the Lakers, who I believe from the start were going to go to the finals. And primarily because LeBron James has been to the finals like 8 or 9 of the last 10 years. So how are you going to bet against that guy, right? It's like betting against Tom Brady going to the finals. So, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with LA. Again, they're going against a team that has, supposedly, these 2, I shouldn't even say supposedly, AD and LeBron are 2 of the top 5 guys in the league, right? No question. And so we look at Denver and they sort of have that too in the making, right? With Jokic and Murray, they got these young guys that are coming up that in a few years will probably be the ADs and the LeBron James of the league. And so this is amazing because you have that matchup that I think is going to be really tight. And it comes down to the bench, and LA presumably has a deeper bench. A lot of those guys are, have had careers already and are sort of hanging on to whatever they might have left. It's like a dude with a cul-de-sac haircut. You know what I'm saying? He's just hanging on to the little wispies around his head. And that's kind of what I feel like when you got J.R. Smith and Dion Waiters and these kind of guys off the bench. Caruso is probably their most impactful player, I would say, off the bench. Kuzma can be and does sometimes, but he's not necessarily consistent enough to be in that conversation yet. Um, so that'll be interesting to see, where they go. And when we talk about, coaches keeping people's heads in the game, Doc Rivers has pretty much always been able to do that. Albeit he's always had a really great cast of players, especially if you think about those Blake Griffin years with Chris Paul, DeAndre Jordan, JJ Redick. Like they had a team, they had a solid squad, and he was always able to. He's always been a really great coach at keeping the egos in check and getting everyone to buy into the game plan. Of course, they've never really had long term deep playoff success. And maybe again, some of that comes down to having too much talent, which I know sounds weird, but when you think back to the Portland Trailblazers of the late 90s, early 2000s, it was another team that had so much talent but just couldn't get it together. Um, and then you see, what Lou Williams had said coming out of that series with Denver was that they didn't have the chemistry, they didn't have the cohesion, they didn't have what it took to operate as a unit on the floor. And when you saw what some of their antics were early on in the playoffs against Portland, when Dame missed the two free throws that essentially would have tied the game and given Portland the ability to move ahead and possibly win that game. And then when he missed those two free throws, which is completely out of character for him. He's like a 90% free throw shooter, one of the most clutch players in the game. Um, they were dancing on the sidelines. They were laughing on the sidelines. They were, mocking him. And then they go into Twitter and mocking him. And, sort of the funny thing was after they had lost game 7, CJ McCollum and Dame Lillard went to Twitter and were calling out the Clippers players who were calling them out during that game. So when you see sort of these antics that the Clippers were engaging in, not to mention 3 of their players getting suspended or quarantined early on in the bubble for having left the bubble. Lou Williams, most notably, for going to a strip club to get chicken wings. Come on, Lou. Montrezl Harrell as well. And so, there wasn't I feel like there wasn't enough leadership in the team, in the locker room, on the floor, amongst the team, amongst the cohort of guys, amongst the brotherhood that was really keeping everyone in check. Of course, LeBron is that guy on LA. I think that Kyle Lowry is that guy in Toronto. I think Jimmy Butler is that guy in Miami. Um, and of course, you look at the coaching staff for all those teams, and we're talking about deep basketball knowledge, passion, and that's the sort of stuff. And every one of those teams, with the exception of Toronto, are still in the playoffs. So you look at, what those teams did to prepare themselves for the playoffs and for every game, knowing the situation that they were going to be in with the bubble and not being able to see their family and friends, which is extremely hard, right? Not being able to see your kids, not being able to see your wife. Um, but those coaches and those teams were able to have the personnel to keep everyone locked in enough. And I don't think the LA Clippers necessarily had that. And that's why they fell apart ultimately towards the end here, especially in game 7. So that was a bit of a shock, right? And I think that not a lot of people expected Denver. For one, I thought that series was going to be boring. I was like, Clippers are going to win 4-1, maybe 4-2. And they're just going to go on and meet LA in the conference finals. And that's kind of the matchup everyone had been waiting for all season long, because of course it was the conversation of who is the best player in LA, because right, it's the Clippers and the Lakers. They share the same court, they share the same city, and we have Kawhi Leonard, who everyone after last season, was had all these conversations of, where does Kawhi rank in the top 10? Is Kawhi the best player in the league? Is Kawhi one of the best players of all time? 2-time defensive player, 2-time finals MVP, 2-time champion, blah, blah, blah. And then you've got LeBron James. Resume speaks for itself. You don't even need to go down the list. And so everyone's looking forward to that matchup. Unfortunately, it never happened. But I think for sports fans, for basketball fans, this is kind of especially for betting fans, this is actually great, because you're starting to see a market that hasn't really blown up since Carmelo Anthony with Denver. And now they're in the conference finals with a chance to go to the finals, a really good chance. I'm not even going to count them out. I don't even want to say who's going to win that series. I might even say Denver's going to win the series just so I don't look like a fool. Or maybe I will look like a fool by saying Denver's going to win that series, but it's so unpredictable right now as everyone's playing top-notch basketball. There's no travel, right? There's no road games. There's no going to the airport after the game and then having a few hours of sleep and then going back to the new gym and getting used to the rims and getting used to the crowd and all that sort of stuff. There is no crowd, there's no travel. It's just ball. It's just pickup ball, and it's like the AAU. I know it's been referred to a lot in the bubble, sort of like the AAU days, where a lot of these guys had played with each other since they were kids. It's like a college atmosphere. They get out of the games, they see each other in the hallways, they see each other by the pool, they're eating lunch, they're hanging out. And that's, I think that was a good part and a bad part. With some players, I think it was great for some players who really need the social connection, who are able to have people around to conversate with, to play ball with, to, just talk to and have friends around. But for some people, it could have been detrimental because it got them out of focus. And so we're going to see what happens with these last few teams that are left. Miami, I think, not only because they're up 2-0 right now against Boston, but I think Miami's going to go to the finals. They're such a well-coached team. Eric Spoelstra is so locked in. When you see that guy, you can just see how much a Pat Riley has been infused in him. And he's a guy that Spoelstra started off in the dungeons, of the arena, going over tape, back when we had tape, going over tape and tape and tape and trying to figure out coaching strategies and trying to figure out advantages, and drawing up plays and whatever he could to try to put himself in a position to work with the organization at some sort of high level. And Pat Riley believed in him. Pat Riley sort of coached him along the way. And really brought him up through the ranks of the Miami Heat organization. And you look at him now, and he's the most tenured coach in the Eastern Conference. He's probably one of the most successful coaches in the last 10 years as well. He's got a great way of connecting with his players and keeping them locked in and keeping them focused. You watch them on the court, they don't really ever look at the referees for calls. They're not trying to draw charges. You know what I mean? They're not trying to play that ticky-tack kind of shit basketball that a lot of these players play, like, Marcus Smart, sometimes Kyle Lowry as well. And they just go out and ball. They go out and play. They go out and fight for every possession. They fight for every rebound. They drive to the hoop. They're aggressive. They got some talented players as well, but they gel. They cohesively play, and you could tell they play to win. They're like literally down by double digits every time you see them play at some point in the game, and then they come back and win. They just grit it and grime it out. And that's sort of what it takes in the playoffs, right? If you watch hockey at all, you know that the real estate gets smaller, and it's the teams that have this sort of playoff pedigree, if you will. The teams that can play rough, that can play tough, that can play fast, that can play in small corners, that come out and win the games. And, Miami is like exactly that style of basketball. And so I think they're going to make some serious moves moving forward. I'm just going to touch base real quick before I cut it off here about next season free agency. I don't want to go too deep into it because there's a lot to talk about with that, and I want to save that for a future conversation, which I may be doing tomorrow. But anyway, to go into next season, I think that next season is going to be really interesting. The salary cap is going to be adjusted because, of course, the television, the money that went to the TV contract is going to be reneged a little bit because of how COVID affected this season and how it's going to affect next season, because at this point, basketball should be done, right? And it's not going to start up in October, November next year. And so now you've got to reschedule all the games. You've got to figure everything out. So I think some of the money is going to be moved around a little bit, and players won't necessarily, or teams, I should say, won't necessarily have the money that they thought they would to sign some of these guys to max contracts. But in any respect, there's a lot of big players that are going to move and a lot of big pieces, I think, that can move. We look at the Raptors, and again, we look at Fred VanVleet, look at Kyle Lowry even, and that Masai Ujiri is not afraid to pull the trigger and make a serious move because he's all about winning. And at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to, right? Like, he's built an amazing team and a franchise over there. Who knows if Masai leaves and goes to New York? They've been trying to vet him for some time. I don't know any team in the league that wouldn't want Masai as their president or GM. He's obviously been proven to be one of the best ones. He's won GM of the year when he was in Denver before he came to Toronto. So, we'll see what happens if Freddie and Kyle go with in some blockbuster trade. If we bring Giannis over, that'll change the entire makeup of Toronto, because you see a guy like Giannis control so much of the possession of the ball, time of the ball, that necessarily I don't think would work in a team like Toronto's favor, right? Because they have guys that can produce, they have guys that can contribute, but at the same time, maybe it gives Giannis a little bit of rest. He doesn't have to do as much. He doesn't have to be a quadruple double guy every game because he's got other guys that can contribute and they can sort of fill those lanes and provide him with the support he needs, which I don't necessarily think he has in Milwaukee. And that was pretty evident when we got into, the later stages of the playoff matchup with Miami. Miami just wore him down. And some of those guys didn't really show up until Giannis was out of the lineup. Read into that whatever you will. Um, and so, we look at what's going to happen next season, free agency, really unpredictable. I want to look at it from the perspective of the Raptors because that's my team, that's my squad, that's who I follow. So I've been following for years and years, since 95, since they came in, since Damon Stoudemire. Remember when he had the Nikes with the bubbles and him and Jason Kidd had the same shoes, co-rookie of the year. Toronto's got a lot riding on next season, right? Because you go from winning the championship to second best record in the league, coach of the year, guys starting to blossom and bloom. And then unfortunately, losing to, I don't want to say a better coach team, but, a more tactical, strategical team that just ended up having what it took to beat us, right? And you win some, you lose some. And that's what it is. And there's no one to blame. There's no one to point fingers at. It just was what it was. And, we had guys that were run down, guys that were worn out, dudes playing 50 minutes, like in that double overtime game, 53 minutes for Kyle Lowry. So you can only do that for so long, right? You can only push people so long before they're worn out. So we'll see where that goes. But I think Toronto's got all the pieces. If we can, I had a friend ask me recently if I was a GM, would I bring DeRozan back? I don't think DeRozan would come back. I think it was really sour the way that Toronto, the experience of him getting let go was really sour in terms of how he felt he was treated, and you can't blame him for that. He's been everything to that franchise since he came in as a 19-year-old rookie. I don't think he would come back. And to answer his question, I said I wouldn't bring him back, but I'd bring Kawhi back. Like Kawhi should have never left. We had Kawhi, we would be going straight back to the finals. The pressure would have been off Norm, Freddie, Kyle, even Mark, and even Serge. Like they wouldn't have had to contribute as much as they needed to throughout the season, which may have led to some of the injuries later in the season, especially going into the playoffs. We'll see even if there's an option for Kawhi, in a couple of years. So lots of questions to be answered. Like I say, I don't want to go too deep into it because I'm going to actually use this as another segment, possibly tomorrow, but in the next coming weeks as well as the playoffs continue to unfold. As we start to look at the finals coming up, we're definitely going to get into a few more podcasts for the finals. We're going to have a few guests on as well. A couple of them couldn't make it tonight, unfortunately, because of family obligations. I'm a family man myself, so I get that. I understand that 100%. But we're going to be chatting a lot about what's happening right now with the league, what's going to happen next season, and how different, basketball is going to be. Are we ever going to get crowds back? Are they necessarily going to need to be traveling and playing in these arenas? Like there's so many unanswerable questions right now. It's all up in the air. I'm going to leave it at that, though. I do really appreciate everyone for tuning in, for being a part of this, and for being with me on my maiden voyage on the podcast here on Studio Steve. I got lots to talk about with basketball. I got lots to talk about with music, including a lot of my own music that's coming out in the next few months. Freestyle Friday, something I've been doing on Instagram. This Friday, as of tomorrow, actually is week 23. So tune into that if you follow me on Instagram. If you don't, I'm going to post it on my YouTube channel here anyway, and you guys can check it out. 23 weeks straight. And we're going to keep going strong. New rhymes every week. There's a lot to talk about with mental health, something that I was afflicted with as well, and something that I'm a avid supporter of and an advocate of, and just a lot to talk about. I got lots of people lined up that have interesting conversations and things that they want to bring to the table, and I'm here to facilitate that. And again, if you are one of those people, please reach out to me and we can do that as well. So thank you very much for tuning in. I appreciate you guys. NBA playoffs, Jamal Murray, Kitchener, Ontario, stand up. Let's go beat the Lakers. All right. Peace out.